Cloud-first development helps your business move fast, but misconfigurations and blind spots are part of the deal. App and dev teams get the flexibility, while security teams are left with the stress of managing new risk using legacy workflows. ExtraHop Reveal X provides cloud-native network detection and response, backed by cloud-scale machine learning that helps you spot threats and unify processes across hybrid environments. Learn more at extrahop.com/securityweekly. That's extrahop.com/securityweekly. Let the team at Black Hills Information Security test your defenses. With over 10 years of experience in penetration testing, red teaming, and threat hunting, the testers at Black Hills will help you find the holes in your security before the bad guys do. The team at Black Hills cares about educating and sharing their knowledge by creating countless blogs, open source tools, and webcasts for you to learn more about the tradecraft of pen testing and red teaming. Visit securityweekly.com/BHIS to join their mailing list and view the latest blogs and webcasts from Black Hills Information Security. Keep your company and products relevant, competitive, and reliable by standardizing your security framework to protect intellectual property, become a reliable business partner, and guard financial and customer information. Standards Connect is an online standards management solution from ANSI. It's Standards Access Simplified. Standards Connect is a cost-saving, fully customizable solution for entrepreneurs and companies that spend $2,000 or more per year on standards and want to translate spend into a subscription model, want to simplify access, search, monitoring, and collaboration, or need a centralized hub of standards for multiple users at one or more locations. Get a free trial at securityweekly.com/ANSI. That's /ANSI.
Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Paul Asadorian and Jason Albuquerque. We need your help in a new survey we're running for research purposes for an upcoming webcast. How mature is your security automation? Please visit securityweekly.com/5 stages of automation maturity. Yes, that's just spell it all out. Once I get Paul to bring up the new website, I have a link to it. Anyways, we're going to share the results in a webcast in November because we want to see how people are doing with their maturity when it comes to security automation. This year's Compass Cybersecurity Symposium is being held at Twin River Casino in Lincoln, Rhode Island on September 25th, just 15 minutes outside of Providence, which makes it about 25 minutes from the office. The venue has plenty of free and easy parking. Speakers include social engineering expert Chris Hadnagi and Security Weekly podcast founder Paul Asadorian. Use the discount code SW2019 to save $20 on registration. All right, let's get to our next interview. Brian Reed brings decades of experience in mobile, apps, security, dev, and operations management, including NowSecure, Good Technology, BlackBerry, ZeroFox, Boxtone, Microfocus, and Intersolve, working with Fortune 2000 global customers, mobile trailblazers, and government agencies. With more than 25 years building innovative products and transforming business processes, Brian is a dynamic speaker and compelling storyteller who brings unique insights and global experience. Brian, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here today.
So we want to talk some stories. During our prep call, part of what we were debating is, well, how do we frame the problem when it comes to mobile apps? Because I think sometimes we overlook mobile app security. I think a lot of us chase the web app security component and sometimes forget about the mobile piece. So let's start with that kind of problem statement. What are some of the problems around mobile app security?
I think start maybe with questions to ask yourself for those who are listening and watching along, which is, do you know the volume of transactions and user engagement on your websites versus your mobile apps? You'll find what I found is that the far majority of people I talk to can't actually tell me what their transaction volume or usage is on web versus mobile, which then leads to the next natural question, which is, what are you investing to secure and protect that? And is that a relative percentage to whatever your usage is? More often than not, as you said, the mobile usage is now exceeding web usage, yet the security and privacy investments on web have not followed over to mobile. So you have this sort of natural gap being created in the business, which in turn creates issues for the business, operating in the free markets, right? So, exactly. How does this manifest itself in many different ways when you get to specific problems, right? In the last, just in the last year, right, we had British Airways and Air Canada both had breaches for covering over 100,000 records. We had Under Armour's mobile MyFitness app breached with 150 million user accounts. A couple weeks ago in Japan, you may have heard that the 7-Eleven app was breached and actually phished, so that 7-Eleven purchases were rerouted basically into a local bank account into 7-Eleven coffers. And so it's out there, but people are kind of still a little more focused on web security than they are for mobile, and they need to get on board.
And Brian, is this in the setting of product security? In other words, I'm a company, I make a product, and I have users, not necessarily for an enterprise that has users that might be using an app, although I can see it in that sense too, right? This is like I own the app, and I need security inside the app that I created.
Yeah, so I'm the application developer, right? So I could be working at Capital One. I could be working at Domino's. I could be working for Maersk in the shipping industry, right? Those are kind of examples of different kinds of applications where each of those organizations actually has knocking on the door of 100 apps or more. You might know them for the half a dozen apps they have in the App Store that consumers use, but there are also the apps that run the business behind the scenes that are maybe privately deployed to employees on a tablet or a smartphone or what have you that help them run the business. There are about 4 million apps in iTunes and Google Play. We estimate there's somewhere around 20 to 30 million additional business-only, privately used internal applications as well being used by employees, partners, customers, and what have you. So it's a pretty big portfolio of apps that fundamentally need to be built with security from the ground up.
And there was some controversy. Was it Apple's internal app that let them order lunch or something? Someone pulled credentials. I don't remember what it was. And it kind of triggered that, larger companies must have a lot of internal only apps, right?
They certainly do, right? And again, for every one you see in the App Store, there could be anywhere between 10 and 100 apps behind that are the private business apps. If you just sort of think about how a retail supply chain oriented business operates, right? If they have their own trucking fleet, if they have their own shipping, if they have their own warehousing, if they manufacture their own products, if they white label commercial products built by others, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There typically are a lot of mobile apps there. Now, they could be a commercial vendor's mobile app who builds software for supply chain, for example.
Right.
Or they could be the homegrown ones, or they hired a consulting firm to build something special, right? The mobal supply chain is gigantic now. And the traffic, it's interesting for me in this business. I hadn't even realized that at the end of 2017, believe it or not, ComScore data, they're typically viewed as a good measurer of usage. The ComScore data right at the end of 2017, beginning of 2018, showed that it actually flipped. And for most categories of applications, mobile apps exceed web apps in terms of overall internet usage. And so that's a surprise to a lot of people, except for those who are running businesses who know their customers are using mobile to work with them.
Yeah, and I think it's a huge, security aside for a moment, it's a huge usability and important aspect of the business 100%. Because if you look at a large retail chain, like Starbucks or CVS, whose apps I use, if the app is a terrible user experience, I'm going somewhere else that has an app that has a better user. And it's not about security. Like the first thing is I got to be able to use the app, and I can't spend hours trying to figure out how to use it because I'm just going to go to someone else's. Then, of course, as a security person, like I flip it and I'm like, what's the security of this app?
Right. Right, and in fact, security can be usability, and security and privacy can be usability or not. Wait, this application is asking for a whole lot of private information it shouldn't need in order for me to buy a product? Ooh, I'm going to run away. That's a failure in usability that actually may be violating privacy rules, right? And so, there's a trust that comes with a name brand company typically about whether people will use their websites or their mobile apps. And you're right about the user experience, right? And that really comes first. And organizations need to think about it as that user experience also includes security and privacy, and an assumption that should be baked in. And it should be reasonably frictionless, right, in terms of implementing security controls that the user will adapt to have that great user experience that your developers work so hard to create.
And it's so true, but because for example, I think, so I have a wireless speaker system, right? And if I log into the app maybe with my account and such, right? And I can make change. But if someone else just has the app and they're on your network, if you have kids, you'll notice that they find out what the app is, they install it and start making changes to your wireless speaker system. And then you're struggling to figure out, how do I even implement controls, right? In a lot of these apps, Brian, right? Just like make assumptions that you don't need controls. And I'm like, no. If you have kids, you need controls. Like, right. For this one
you
example.
have kids and you have malicious actors and you have, people that just do stupid fat thumbing and make mistakes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all of those kinds of things. And that's why they should have stuff like multi-factor authentication, right? Or escalating privileges as a feature built in to make sure only the right people can do certain things.
Mm-hmm.
Controls for that, right? And so it's a very interesting space for me. I've been in mobile for a long time and had understood where the risks were, but now that I've got a database of 4 million apps in the App Store and millions of other apps, companies have built that we've helped them test, it's pretty astounding and really polarizing. You have that 10% that's doing a phenomenal job,
right?
10 to 20% of organizations doing really, really phenomenal job in baking security in. And then you have the rest that are the laggards that are, racing to build the cool feature and forgetting, they're leaving the back door open for the bad guys to get into, or just simply leaking data everywhere.
Yes.
Right. Like for some of these apps, you walk off the airplane in a bad part of the world, and the apps are broadcasting, "Hey, I'm Brian Reed. I got an iPhone. It's AT&T. Here's my phone number." And that's the Facebook app broadcasting it, right? The Twitter app or the Instagram, because they're all looking for friends to share with, right? So there's building the technology securely. There's also making sure that when it operates, it respects your privacy.
Yeah. Right. And Brian, you've talked a lot about it so far. You've mentioned it a few times, getting security baked in. So for us, we've talked about this on the show a lot. It's getting security up front in that SDLC process, right? It's making sure that that we're not at the tail end. We're way up front in the process, and we're part of the build. We're part of the design, the build, and that entire experience. Because again, user experience can be great throughout the entire SDLC process, but if you tail end security, you could literally blow up the whole project.
Well, I think we already identified a fairly easy thing to bring up in those early meetings. I'm not saying it's easy to implement, but having authentication and authorization and just getting your design and development team to think about that in the context of your app, I would assume is a huge win, right? And throwing the privacy of the data in there too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you think about all the time you spend designing the application and specifying requirements for the application of it should have a great login screen, it should have this feature, that feature, we're going to do swipe left or right, or we're going to have augmented reality and whatever all these other great things are. In the app, there should be fundamental security requirements that say, oh, by the way, you should have multi-factor authentication. Oh, by the way, you should respect the user's privacy and ask them if you're going to store information, et cetera, et cetera. Those should be in the fundamental requirements for the application. Match-up security and privacy is just important as the user experience, right? Now, Brian, that's kind of where it starts, going all the way left.
I have a question on that. You can implement a federated identity, so to speak, in like a Google OAuth, right? So you can say, you can log into my application, and I'm going to validate the authentication piece, and I'm going to use Google. What are some of the decisions that go into whether or not to implement that? Because you see some apps, they're like, hey, you can create an account with us, or you can just log in with your Google account. Now, me being a security person, I'm kind of selective who I use for that, but there are protections built into that system that, and so I'm curious, what goes into the design decisions to use that or not?
I think from an identity perspective, right, that's one of the many pillars of careful development that needs to occur. I think as a general rule, actually, using third-party identity is way better than building your own.
Yeah.
Just because that, firms who do identity are building hardened products that know they have the bullseye on the forehead for the bad actors. And so rarely do you hear about an identity breach from an actual identity vendor themselves. What you often hear is a breach of someone who baked their own.
Right.
So the federated identity is a good way to go. I think the biggest thing is whatever way you do it, make sure you go with an authorized vendor. Don't just pull down some open source from some random website. And number two, make sure you test it anyway to make sure you've done it the proper way. Right. And really the third one I'd bake in is make sure you use multi-factor when there's any kind of risk in the application or privacy or credit cards or transactions or something. You really ought to consider a multi-factor approach, which could be, I'm going to use my face to log in or my thumb to log in or what have you. It's still better than a bad guy pretty easily getting a hold of your user ID and password.
Right. What I like about using Google's is, the bad part is you're leaving it up to the user, however they've secured their Google account, right? But I don't have to write into my application two-factor authentication, password resets,
No, that's it.
All that stuff. It saves me a ton of work.
Exactly, and that's another part of the hygiene, right? I talked before about building requirements properly. The other thing is use off-the-shelf software more, but make sure it's from reputable sources, right? It's crazy when we look at our statistics, right? So when we've pen tested millions of apps, literally. When I look at the statistics, 50% of those applications have some sort of network-based vulnerability or network-based data leakage. That was 50% of what's in the App Store, right? In many instances, those are developers who are coding network communication that they're not normally skilled to do.
Yeah.
Right.
Use a third-party tool or use a standard library that your own team writes and tests in order to do that. In the same way, private data gets leaked all over files and other places and permissions on the device. Again, use a standardized third-party component or create a standard component that all apps then reuse. That allows you to squeeze down that risk. On the data at rest kind of issues on the device, again, that's about 48% of all the apps in the App Store have some kind of way they leak some kind of private data on that device. May or may not be interceptable by a bad guy, but certainly people don't want to do it. And so you take hygiene, right, is really a part of that. You start with good requirements. You then create reusable code. Welcome to Software 101, right?
Yep.
Whether it's waterfall, agile, or DevOps. But then also you need to stick in testing and certification to trust but verify, right? Give the developers the components, give them the tools to use, but also make sure you're testing it continuously, that there's no security and privacy squeaking out on you during that whole process.
And the challenge with that, I think, is in larger organizations, especially that have multiple dev teams, is getting all your dev teams onto the same platforms, libraries, and processes, right? Because you're going to have one dev team that's like, we got a lot of applications to write, or a big application to write, and so we're going to use this other thing because it's going to go faster, but it's not the standard authentication or network communications because we feel we can get it done more quickly, and they're rushing to meet requirements. And then getting everyone on the same platform is hard, and when you have to manage the security of all that, it's exponential, right? Every time someone picks up a new method, standard process, library, now it's a whole new ballgame.
But that's a good point too as well, right? Because I mean, I grew up on the engineering infrastructure data center side of the house. You guys grew up on the development side of the house, right? I would imagine that your traditional web application developers and someone developing a mobile app, there's got to be some differences and gotchas and more complexity, right? I mean, could you lean into it a little bit? Because you had mentioned, you know, some of the folks who may be developing mobile apps, it might be their first try. They may not have the experience.
Exactly.
Right? Are there any gotchas or lessons learned that, you know, a traditional developer can take into the mobile world that you can kind of help them and educate them on?
Yeah, I think there's a couple key ones, and we've got developer guides that are used by thousands of developers. And so it's a couple things, right? When you're used to building a web app, you're used to having a browser that does a lot of work for you. On a mobile device, there is no browser that handles network communications for you. There is no browser that handles local file I/O for you. And so in those instances, as you're looking to build a mobile application, you need to, one, assume the device itself is hostile, assume something's trying to steal data from you. Number two is learn how to persist data appropriately inside the operating system. And for iOS and Android, there are particular API calls that are designed for doing that safely. But in your application design, make sure you pick and choose carefully about what you're going to persist anyway. So don't use standard file I/O, use the proper libraries that will give you permissioning and control. And then for the data in transit part, right, the networking part, whereas your browser automatically, make an SSL call and it encrypts HTTP the whole way, that doesn't happen by default. Again, Apple and Google in the last 2 years have both added APIs that will give you two-way TLS fully encrypted connections by default for everything you do going back and forth. So make sure you call those APIs or have a library that your company uses for secure communications two ways, right? So it's really about understanding the fact that you're not in a contained browser that does half the work for you, and you have to understand how to deal with I/O, memory, and network-based communications, because those are the areas where, based on our test data, that's where all the vulnerabilities tend to be found, which tells us the skills are lacking and the testing is lacking as well because they're escaping into the wild.
And the testing tools, I think, change too, because without the browser, I can't do dynamic scanning, really, right? Because I'm interacting with the browser. So from a testing perspective, what has to change from web app testing in the mobile space?
Yeah, no, you brought up a good point. I've got when I talk to folks, I talk about, the Earth is flat and the sun revolves around the Earth, and you can't dynamically test on mobile. Those are three things that are false. About 2 years ago, we invented an engine that allows us to do fully automated dynamic testing on a mobile device. What's interesting is that unlike the browser, because it's actually a full operating system on the mobile device, you can create a test harness that will allow you to test an application dynamically with an automation engine on top of it that requires no human. And so we have technology along with some other companies out here, but NowSecure has fully automated dynamic testing that runs on a mobile device that takes the build out of your build system like Jenkins and DevOps Azure and so on and so forth, and drops it into an automated test. Less than 15 minutes later, it either breaks the build or it passes it and feeds tickets into the ticketing system. And what that allows an organization to do now is they can actually do a dynamic test of a mobile app every build every day. And that really kind of changes the whole paradigm of how you're securing these apps. And I think, over the past number of years since that's been in market, a large number of the name brands have moved to that model because they realized, web I can't dynamically test, but mobile there actually is a way to dynamically test. And the advantage is I have a full operating system that I can put dynamic testing software onto and inject into that app to give me that full automation experience, which is pretty wild. That's why I joined the company. I'd never seen anything like it.
That's really cool.
Yeah, because if you took a traditional web app DAST, and it wouldn't work, right?
Wouldn't do it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So that's
exactly.
innovative, right? Because you need a way to do that. But how many of the other tools kind of also overlap? Do you still do static code analysis? Do you still do software composition analysis? I mean, are those still valid in a mobile app testing?
We tend to find that if you sort of look at the leaders and the laggards, right? You look at the leaders, it's a multi-tool chain, right? So they test security or they implement security at every step. So you start with the design, security and design. You then move into having an SCA tool. You still should be looking at all your source code. SAST is great from a developer feedback perspective. Some of the SAST tools that plug into the IDEs and development environments that are using where they literally give advice as the developer is typing in of how to securely encode something, that's awesome. The standard SAST test after I've checked in my code is full of false positives. But the SAST capabilities that are actually helping me write my code are very valuable. Then you move around the cycle into the automated dynamic testing, and then you want to make sure that not only is the build system calling the dynamic test and it's feeding tickets into the ticketing system, you probably want to have some downstream monitoring of what's going on with your apps once they go into production. Yeah. So security monitoring apps in production, especially if it's a high-risk app or has high-value customer or employee data in it, you probably want to monitor at production time to make sure nothing's going bad there as well. So for the best of breed, it's usually 3 or 4 different tools for security in the tool chain. And I didn't even get to talking about securing the actual tools in the tool chain, which is a whole nother ball of wax.
Well, I like the developer tools provided they give the developer the ability to customize and you take the time to do that. I think it really can be something, at first it may seem like it gets in your way, but once as a developer you tune it and tweak it, it's like, no, that's like not a high priority, that's lower. Yeah. But this one that was lower, I want that to be higher priority. And I've done that in my own development. I've customized it and I use it as a tool to help me, right? And that I think is where you get the wins with the IDE integration.
Yeah, I was working with a team who commented that the IDE plugged them, saved them from the embarrassing, stupid things.
Yes, it does. Yes,
right.
Yeah.
And the one organization I was working with before, they have the bagels of shame. So those who produce the most bugs in a given week through their testing environment has to buy bagels of shame on Friday. And so they talked about how some of the tooling that they've given the developers made it so that it reduced the chance of bagels of shame.
That's awesome.
So again, there's real advantages to helping developers. One of the other big advantages beyond tools is humans. And we also see that those best of breed companies embed security experts in the development teams.
Yeah.
They either work with a developer who wants to develop security skills to become a security lead, or they actually take their security analysts and embed them into the team. And they kind of do fractional across a couple teams to help them bake that security in. And that's got a huge win too, because that really bridges that chasm between the Department of Speed and the Department of No and turns it into two teams now functioning as one and working together. So we really recommend people consider that as well.
Yeah, and what I love about that is, as a security developer, right, you can then, for an example, go into the IDE, create a custom check, and go, hey, every time you see this, tell the developer that that's bad, right? Because I've tested it, and we have checks for that, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, coaching, mentoring, building reusable components, right? So, hey, we've got a new application type we're building. It's going to need to access this piece of high-value data. Therefore, a security developer is going to work with a team to build a reusable piece of code that they'll test the hell out of to make sure it's safe. And then they deploy that, into their application. It's now reusable for future use and helps protect the enterprise overall.
Yeah, the key is keeping that stuff updated as the application changes, right? It's a persistent thing. You always need to be there, right? For any of your tests, right? It's part of development, right? You need the resources to be able to do that.
Yeah, and I'm an old UX guy. I can't imagine having a team without UX or design, and today I can't imagine having a team without security too.
I agree.
I mean, it should just be there.
Yep.
Right. To be there. So you talked about 3 or 4 different tools that get integrated in for mobile app testing. Where does NowSecure sit in those different capabilities?
Sure. It's a great question. So NowSecure's primary focus is automated tooling for security and development. So we plug into the development tool chain. We automatically test the mobile applications on iOS and Android that come out of the build system, like Jenkins and Microsoft Azure DevOps and Circle CI and all those good guys. We automatically generate tickets, feed those tickets into ticketing systems like Jira and all the others. We also feed that data into vulnerability management systems. We can be used in a fully automated mode or an on-demand mode. So sometimes people are just uploading binaries to give them testing. And that's a big chunk of our software testing business. We also have testing tools for security teams. So we have NowSecure Workstation. And what Workstation is really designed for is for a hardcore pen tester to really tear apart a mobile app. So let's imagine you have an IoT mobile app that's connected to a nuclear power plant. You might use this tool to really tear it all the way down in memory to make sure there's no vulnerabilities in it. It's a real performance gain for these really complex applications. We also do pen testing. So a large portion of our business is companies just come to us either to do pen testing because they don't have a security team or to do pen testing just in case during a regular development process. So they may be doing automated testing tools every day of every build, but then we do a quarterly or an annually pen test to just make sure. And they get that good housekeeping seal of approval for the risk and compliance people or their legal department or what have you. So it's great business. We service security and non-security industries. So we do a lot in tech, finance, government agencies as well, a lot of regulated business. We also work a lot in retail, CPG, supply chain. You may have noticed some of the companies I've been naming are very common, right? So the airline ticket you buy, the bank you work with, the hotel you stay in, the car that drives you, a lot of that supply chain, the coffee you order, may have been tested and certified using our tools as part of that process.
That's awesome.
Those are the apps I use the most.
Absolutely.
My United Airlines app for flying, my Marriott app for my hotels, and my Uber app to get me from point A to point B.
And don't forget about your Starbucks app. I started using that recently. Oh, dude, if I drop my kids off at karate and I plug my coffee order into my app, it's a 6-minute drive to the Starbucks. I walk in and grab my order. It's that convenience that's going to drive people to those apps. Unfortunately, not security,
it is, right? If you watch, if you listen to the Starbucks earnings calls, every quarter they're quoting the increase in mobile ordering. If you saw recent news from, I think it was Domino's now, over 50% of Domino's orders run through the Domino's app. So the whole retail CPG space is big. The IoT space, from home automation
it's all
the way through to industrial automation, is gigantic. And as a general rule, a lot of IoT uses a mobile app. May not even have a web app, but it may have a mobile app that's the interface to that thing in order to enable it to do whatever it does.
It's the only interface.
So we need to make sure that, for many things,
there is
really
no web
the only
interface. Yeah, like SmartThings, which I've been using for a long time, there is no web interface. Yeah, it's only the app.
Exactly. So mobile really kind of rules people's lives. It's kind of amazing that I was telling a story of when I first worked with BlackBerry and was carrying a pager, and my kids are looking at me like I'm an alien,
right?
That I didn't have a phone, right? But today, a big part of what we do every day now is on that mobile device. And so organizations, they really need to look, web transactions versus mobile transactions. Where really are your customers? Where is your business today? And where will it be tomorrow? I can imagine companies may have little to no web transaction website experience, maybe just a front door, but the far majority in the future will be mobile in its nature, right? And that continues to force businesses to evolve, but it's also a great opportunity for them to create really cool things like augmented reality. Let me see what that clothes look like, or these glasses look like on my face, and things like that really create cool experiences for folks.
Yeah, and I think the stat you identified at the end of 2017 where we crossed over, I mean, think about it. We are now transacting more business from our phones, right, on these mobile apps than we are in our traditional web business web apps. I mean, that's a huge shift. And my guess is that gap's only going to widen from here on out.
It is. And I go back to the core questions we ask when we talk to folks, which is, do you know what your traffic difference is on mobile versus web? Do you know what your spend difference is for building mobile versus web? And do you know what your security resources are mobile versus web? And for most folks, the answer is they're upside down on the security privacy side of mobile versus web. In many instances, they're racing ahead on the mobile innovation, which is awesome. They need to find a way to sort of close the back door and build in that security. And there's a series of things you can do. It's people, process, technology, right? Welcome to every technology transformation we've ever been in. You can tell from my gray hair that I lived through the mainframe to client server, and it's just yet another version of that. What's so amazing about it is that instant gratification and how it truly changes your life, like going to get coffee in 5 minutes and walking right back out, right? Like getting coffee and then ordering the pizza for lunch, and on the drive home picking up the pizza too, right? And all of those things really do create core experiences and have been disruptive in the market, but are really evolving the economy into a mobile-oriented economy.
Yeah, agreed. Paul? Jason, any additional questions while we have Brian?
No, that was awesome. This is awesome.
That was great. Brian, thank you for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Thanks for having me today. I really appreciate the time to tell the story, man. Mobile rules the world. We're here to keep it safe.
Awesome. If anyone wants to learn more about NowSecure, mobile app security testing, or to download their guide to securing DevOps for mobile apps, please visit securityweekly.com/NowSecure. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. We'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.